Sahin, first of all, I was wondering if you could give us a background of the Turkish developments, I would say in the last century after the First World War, and this very peculiar political system which was established by Kemal Atatürk from the I would say a destroyed empire. But I would nuance this with a current question, and you could put the two things together in your background and analysis. Because, you know, in the previous years, Turkey has emerged as a model of pragmatic and tolerant Islam, and an experience of a good interface between Islam and democracy. In 2011, I interviewed Ehsan El-Erian, one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and he told me that Turkey was a model for them to be considered. In the same year in Tripoli, I interviewed Ali Salabi, which is the most prominent cleric in the Libyan revolution. And he also told me that Turkey, along with Malaysia, were models. Of course, they liked to say that to the Western audience. So that means that following the Turkish model somehow would appease and calm the West. Now, since May and June, we have watched those demonstrations, in Turkey, and we were in touch with another perception of an intolerant and a government which would be trying to impose some Islamic, let's say, rules on this so liberal middle class, and at least part of the society. So I wonder if you could give us that background and then talk about the situation nowadays. What has happened to the Turkish model and to Erdogan's government?
Yes, Lourival, I think this is the proper place to start. First of all, what is this Turkish model? Let me try to explain what is it that makes Turkey special in the Muslim majority world. It's definitely the country which has the longest experience in democratization. Let me put it this way. The paradox with Turkey is that despite the fact that rule of law came to Turkey, to Ottoman Turkey, of course, in the 19th century, middle of 19th century, and then constitutional government started towards the end of the 19th century, and in 1908 we had the second constitutional period when we properly had a parliamentary system with parties competing with each other. And then, unfortunately, that experience, probably one of the freest periods in Turkish political history between 1908 and 1913, came to an end with the First World War and the collapse of the empire, and then the independence movement and the establishment of the republic. And then the republic goes through various stages. First, we have a single party under the Kemalist cadre running the country from 1923 to 1946, end of the Second World War. And from 1950, we introduced multi-party politics, although there are severe restrictions on the right of expression and association. And then, after the end of the Cold War, Turkey begins to really democratize with the start of the accession process to the European Union. Turkey is part of the customs union since 1995 with the European Union, declared candidate for membership in 1999, starts negotiations in 2005, and unfortunately, those negotiations aren't going anywhere since 2006. But as the European Council decided in 2005, Turkey has sufficiently fulfilled the Copenhagen political criteria for membership in the EU, but still it has not entirely fulfilled those political criteria. What is the matter with Turkey? What is the matter with this paradox? It has such a long history in, rule of law, individual rights, and multi-party politics, and even has started an accession process with the EU, but still it is not quite there. Why is this so? My explanation, of course, along with quite a few others, is that the founding philosophy of the Turkish Republic, which we call Kemalism, which is secular Turkish nationalism, was perhaps what Turkey needed in the founding stages of the Republic. But that founding philosophy has increasingly become a hinder for Turkey to consolidate a really liberal and pluralist regime. Why is it so? Kemalism is based on three pillars. First, it's of course, Kemalists were, and before Kemal, he was part of the Young Turk movement, the Young Turks who dominated the last phase of the Ottoman Empire, of course. And just like other Young Turks, he was very much influenced by a certain understanding of modernity. He was very much subscribing to the kind of authoritarian modernization model. First of all, democracy would not be helpful to modernize the new Turkey. So you needed an authoritarian regime, an authoritarian single-party regime. Secondly, a modern nation had to be a secular nation, so that religion should not play any role in the politics of the country. And since you could not do away with religion, the best way to manage it would be to take it under state monopoly and control and introduce restrictions on religious freedoms. What did that mean? That meant that first of all, they established a presidency of religious affairs which monopolizes all religious affairs in the country, and then there are restrictions on religious freedoms, which means that the religious brotherhoods, which are the bulk of the people in Turkey are affiliated with, are banned beginning in 1925, still banned since 1925, and then you are also restricting the religious rights of the biggest religious minority, which is the Alevis, which are becoming increasingly talked about, partially because of the Syrian crisis, of course.
They are 15% of the population.
Yeah, 15% of the population. They're still fighting for a legal status in the country. And then the third pillar is, of course, that the Kemalist mentality says that a modern nation can only be a unicultural nation. So we are going to create a Turkish nation out of all these ethnic and religious minorities that used to make up the Ottoman Empire and have sought refuge in Anatolia after being kicked from the Balkans, kicked from Russia, etc. So they implement a policy of forced assimilation. Now, these policies of assimilation are well taken by Muslims who have been expelled from the Balkans and Russia. They find Turkey a safe haven, and they are very willing to assimilate into this new Turkish nation. And Kemalist policies are actually quite successful regarding that part of the population. But Kurds, who still make about 20% of the population, of course, are subjected to this forced assimilation policies, which they revolt against, and we have had 29 different Kurdish rebellions against these assimilationist policies. Now, sorry, Lourival, I will carry on with a few more minutes with this. You would ask, have these Kemalist pillars of the Turkish Republic been in place ever since? Of course not. By time, some of these pillars have been, reviewed and softened in certain aspects. First of all, of course, the single-party regime disappeared by the end of the Second World War. Why did it so? Because there were both internal and external pressures for Turkey to open up. Turkey felt a lot threatened by the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc that came about at the end of the Second World, and wanted to join the Western alliance as soon as possible. And there were also a lot of protest coming from the people inside the country who were fed up with this authoritarian regime which had been going on for decades. So that's how they opened up. And then gradually the democratic regime has been broadening. And of course the last phase for this was the accession process, which was a great help, a great boost for Turkey to really take away those restrictions on rights, which unfortunately continue to exist in part. And then the end of the Cold War, beginning in early 1990s, enabled people like the Kurds, of course, to start to, from 1984, we had the PKK uprising, but finally, from 1990s onwards, the Turkish government started to realize that they had to adopt certain measures to meet the demands of the Kurdish people at large, so that from early 1990s onwards, there were stepwise recognition of Kurdish demands, and equally with the Alevis, who started to demand recognition of their religious identity beginning in early 1990s. So gradually, we are observing the democratization, liberalization, and recognition of diversity in the country. But we're still not there. We're still not there, but the direction of what is happening in the country is towards consolidation of democratic regime. Now, maybe this will be too long for an answer to your question, but let's pick it up from where I have tried to explain. So we're dealing with Kemalism, and we are trying to achieve in Turkey something which will be do away with the Kemalist dogmas and the Kemalist restrictions on rights and recognize the identities, religious or ethnic or political, whatever, of the people, and reach some sort of a pluralistic and liberal society.
Mm-hmm. During that period, the military establishment, and not only military establishment, but this sort of nationalist, right center establishment and middle class have been able to keep the Muslims and the Islamists apart from power. Then came Erdogan. I think Erdogan does have some sort of common background with the Muslim Brotherhood, although it was banned. He used to have another group, the Welfare Party, right, which ended up banned as well. He was in prison for a few years, wasn't he? And then finally he was able to be accepted somehow in the system and to be elected. And he's already in his third term, and he has in each election from 2002 through 2007 and now 2011, he has been able to increase his share in the votes, and everything seemed to be on track until there were these protests that he was somehow radicalizing and starting to change things. In Turkey, the women are not, or were not, I don't know if that has changed already, were not allowed to wear headscarves in the public universities and schools and public places. It is a very, or used to be a very anti-religious country, on this basis of the Kemalist ideology. It is a Muslim country which has so far forbidden these Muslim public symbols, yeah, and which is a very contemporary issue in Europe. France and Britain are at odds with that sort of a demonstration of religiosity. Well, what happened then to Erdogan? Is he just an issue of perception, or is he more and more empowered and he's daring more to face the demands which belong to part of the Turkish society? Yeah, when I was there covering the Pope's visit, I went to the Kemal Atatürk's monument in Ankara, where the Pope had just been, and there was this family of peasants. And I asked them why they were there. And they said, well, the government said it was okay for us to come. So the Turks are trying to reconcile all these sides of their history and their values, yeah, and put together a Turkish identity. So how does Erdogan interact with that process nowadays?
What you're saying is that this Kemalist straitjacket on Turkish society, be it Muslims, be it majority Muslims, Sunni Muslims, be it Alevis, be it the Kurds, they were all subject to this. And of course, the liberal-minded people in the country were all subject to this Kemalist straitjacket. And how was the straitjacket preserved under a multi-party system after the end of the Second World War? Turkey, joined first Council of Europe, the European Organization for the Defense of Human Rights. Turkey is actually a founding member of the Council of Europe in 1949. And then in 1952, it joined NATO. And then in 1961, it joined OECD, the Organization of Industrialized Countries. And then, as I've already pointed to, it was first associated with the European Economic Community, and then signed a customs union agreement in the middle of the 90s, etc. But the most important developments that took place starting from 1980s onwards, which were the background to what happened with Welfare Party, the transition from welfare to Justice and Development Party, from the transition from Erbakan to Erdogan. How do we explain all this? I think there are several factors which explain this. First of all, we have the Turgut Özal revolutions, reforms that took place in early 1980s. Until 1980, Turkey had a command economy, a state-dominated economy, an import substitution economy, very similar to what Brazil had. And this meant that the state was subsidizing and supporting certain business elements which were based in the large cities and which agreed mostly with the Kemalist ideology of the state. So the state was subsidizing these groups, and the regime was such that in order to grow, you had to have the support of Ankara and the state policy. So at this time, the Turkish Islamist movement, which was represented by the Welfare Party, was very much statist in its orientation. They just wanted to share part of the power in Ankara so that those subsidies that go to the Kemalist, secularist business classes can be diverted now towards the Anatolia-based, the more conservative, the religious-based bourgeoisie of Anatolian mainland. But with Özal came a great big change because Turkey decided to transit to a market-based economy. The economy was liberalized and globalized, and this provided a great opportunity for the Anatolia-based business classes to, make their money out of investing in industries to export to world markets. So gradually, the social base of the Islamist movement in Turkey started to change, because the base of the Islamist movement was now demanding a democratic regime in the country, as democratic as possible. They were against any military intervention in the running of the country. They also wanted support for companies to open up to the world markets, and they gradually also started to put demands on the political movement, which was mainly based on these groups of professional and business elites, to adapt their programs to their demands. Previously, when the Islamist movement at the stage of Welfare Party was very much statist, was very much against European Union integration, was very much in favor of Turkey being the leader of the Muslim nations, such an orientation away from the Western alliance and more towards the Islamic world. The Erdogan and Gül and Orange and certain other young generation leaders of the Islamist movement have started to rethink their positions. And this happened after, especially, you see, the Islamist parties were continuously closed down in Turkey because of, by the Constitutional Court, saying that these parties are violating the secularist principles of the Republic, and every time they were closed down, they were able to reorganize in a new party. Now, with the closing down of the Welfare Party, and after that another party they founded, finally they sat down and made surveys all over the country, and they sat down and had a big discussion, and finally came out in 2001 with this new party and new party program, which was entirely different from what it used to be. So there was a big change from Erbakan to Erdogan. Now, instead of a statist economic philosophy, they had a market-based philosophy. They said, we want a competitive market economy, and we want an open economy so that we attract foreign direct investments from the outer world, and we will see to it that we will bring Turkey into the European Union as soon as possible.
And that's the Justice and Development Party, the AKP.
That's AKP party, of course.
Let me ask you about this social base. So it's not fair to say that their social base originally was rural, just rural Anatolia, because you were mentioning businesses, which are those agriculture business and commodities. What kind of social base is that?
Their social basis actually is these industrial centers out in Anatolia. They are not, it's not a rural party, it's very much urban-based party, but the base is in the Anatolian heartland, as opposed to the Kemalist big bourgeoisie being based in the larger cities like Istanbul, Izmir, and Bursa, to name just a few. So the Turkish capitalist class, so to say, broke down into two different factions. One ideologically very much loyal to the Kemalist state, and the other very much critical of the Kemalist state, asking for a stop to military interventions and government by elected politicians being the central demand. And, as I said, a very strong support for Turkish accession to the European Union, because they were very much interested in having access to European markets.
But then where would the liberals be? If they're against a military, a pro-military regime, and if they're secularist, where do they stay? Is there a third way, or?
Now, this is an interesting question. How shall I answer it? Now,
it's a very Egyptian question, by the way.
Now,
that's the Egyptian dilemma nowadays.
I have already mentioned one dynamic which helps why Turkey has started to broaden its democracy. That was the political economic changes of policy by starting with Özal, and which have been continued, of course, and then coming into the picture the promise of a prospectful European Union membership. And then a very important third dynamic is that after the last military takeover in 1980, the military regime was so suppressive, so oppressive, that all the various intellectual groups who had subscribed to authoritarian and totalitarian ideologies prior to 1980 radically changed their views, and Islamists, ultranationalists, communists, whatever, out of all these groups, a lot of people changed their views and started to propagate, advocate for a democracy on European norms. And that made a lot of difference. And I believe even the Islamist movement was very much affected by this change of intellectual climate in Turkey beginning in early 1980s. So all these factors came together for this very interesting phenomenon which is peculiar to Turkey, where, you know, Turkish Islamist movement, which was able to organize from the end of 1960s on, has never been radical, has never been pro-violence, has never really actually aimed at implementing Sharia law when it came to power. It was, you know, more of a nationalistic kind of an Islamic movement, statist, nationalistic, and that kind of Islamism experienced a very remarkable transformation with the coming into existence of the Justice and Development Party, coming out with this program of seeking EU membership as the primary aim of the party. And of course, because of this radical change of profile, ideological profile, and also because of the rather dismal performance of the Kemalist parties, they were able to win elections in 2002, and after coming to power in 2002, you know, they've been in power now in 3 terms. In the first term, between 2002 to 2007, they were very active in pursuing EU reforms, which meant that restrictions on the expression of Kurdish identity were lifted gradually, human rights violations were taken under control, rule of law, establishing rule of law, steps towards that were also adopted, and most importantly, civilian control over the military was another major accomplishment in this period. Not all the constitutional clauses that give the military special privileges in the Turkish regime, but important ones were amended so that basically civilian authority was in place with the reforms towards EU accession. And of course, because of these changes, it was the European Council decided that Turkey had sufficiently fulfilled the criteria so that the accession negotiations could start. And then came the second period from 2007 to 2011. This period was, the energy of the government was mostly spent on trying to avoid military coup plots and even a judicial coup plot. By judicial coup plot, I mean there were efforts from the bureaucracy, Kemalist bureaucracy side, to get even the Justice and Development Party, which had acquired 47% of the vote, to be closed. And it was actually a very narrow affair that the party escaped closure. We don't really know what went on behind the scenes, but with the difference of just one vote in the Constitutional Court, this party, which had been in power for 5 years and was garnering 47% of the vote, escaped closure. And then between 2007 and 2011, the reform process picked up again from 2009. And in 2010, we had important constitutional amendments so that even in more areas, there was this move towards broadening of freedoms and towards consolidation of democracy. And of course, I should also emphasize in this context, why is this Justice and Development Party in Turkey so powerful? Why is it that after coming to power with just 34% of the vote in 2002, was able to garner 47% in 2007 and 50% in 2011. Average income in Turkey has more than tripled during the last 10 years. When AKP came to power in 2002, the average income was $3,200.
A year?
What?
A year.
Yeah, of
A
course,
year.
per capita income a year. And nowadays it's reached $11,000. And of course, like any other constituency anywhere in any democracy, people actually decide mainly on economic issues, and this is the reason why there is such broad support for this party. And they have pursued very sound economic policies. They made a major point of keeping macroeconomic balances in place. They have encouraged foreign direct investments. They have also been very careful to introduce certain welfare measures to meet the demands of the social needs of the people.
Milk, he has been releasing milk for the poor, is it?
Well, you know, free milk, well, that's maybe not as important a measure, but they have provided, for example, free textbooks for all in all schools, and they have, of course, improved the social security system. More and more people have come under the umbrella of the social security system. They started from a very limited base, and now I believe most people, a large percentage of the population, are now covered with the social security system.
It means medical treatment for free.
Yeah. They have immensely improved health services. That's another major issue. And then they also provide subsidies for the handicapped, which is an amazing reform. I mean, I think something like 10% of Turkey's population have in their family some handicapped person, and for the first time ever in Turkish history, these handicapped people are getting some sort of subsidy. I mean, I'm emphasizing all these to show why these people, why the Justice and Development Party is so strong. And they're probably going to win the next election.
Which is when?
To be held in 2015, of course.
And being so...
I mean, if the economy does not, collapse, which is not very likely. Of course, the last 2 years, the growth rate, the previous growth rate is no longer in place. Now it's between 2 and 3% for the last 2 years, and this, if it continues with just 2-3%, it's going to be problematic, of course.
But then, Sahin, being so popular, do you think that he started to dare on a more Islamic agenda? Is it fair to say that? Or
now, okay, let's come to what is happening since 2011. That is the question.
yeah,
I mean, you asked about the liberals. What were their position on Erdogan? Of course, most liberals supported AKP's policies in favor of European Union accession, in favor of meeting the demands of the Kurds, in favor of meeting the demands concerning violation of human rights, etc., and of course the economic performance of the country. After 2011, I think there is a strange development taking place. Erdogan has become, all of a sudden, has assumed a position whereby he is becoming more and more arbitrary and more authoritarian in his style of leadership. Why is this happening? I think simply the answer is power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's become, after getting 50% of the vote in the last election, he has, decided that he can do whatever he likes, and he even started to ask for more power by introducing this idea of presidential system for Turkey. Turkey has traditionally a parliamentary system. He has started to, seek some sort of presidential system which would provide him with more powers than Putin in Russia. And of course, that's not so welcome by at least a big part of the liberal intelligentsia, so that nowadays, since actually 2011, part of the liberal intelligentsia has turned their backs on Erdogan and criticizing him. He is also resorting to, he's not an Islamist. Now, I think this is an important issue which I should talk a little bit about. There must be a definition for an Islamist party. And that definition, I think, is if a party, first of all, would like to turn its back on the West, separate the country from the Western ties, if it aims to unite the Islamic world under one umbrella or one flag, and if it at least partially is in favor of adopting Sharia law, then any party with such traits can be considered an Islamist party. But AKP, it's pro-Europe. You may say that Turkey, the government party in Turkey has not been as energetic, but that is partly explained by the fact that Europeans haven't been so enthusiastic about Turkish accession after 2007. Major changes happened in Europe, whereas Germany and France had governments who were very pro-Turkish accession, lost power, and we have now, since some 2005 and 2007, we have a different situation in France and Germany, where those countries have decided that there is no place for Turkey in the European Union. And on other counts, AKP has never had this idea of becoming the leader for uniting all the Muslim peoples. And, of course, it has a very liberal economic policy. Open markets and a liberal and globalized economic system. So, I mean, I'm really surprised when some people still in the West continue to write about AKP being an Islamist party. It's not an Islamist party. It's a Muslim Democratic Party. I mean, they are, of course, very devoutly religious people. Not all of them, but the leadership of the AKP is definitely very devoutly religious, but they have never talked about implementing Sharia law in any respect, and they've never talked about pulling Turkey out of the Western alliance or, turning their backs on the European accession process. This is a, like a Christian Democratic Party in the West. It's a Muslim Democratic Party. Of course, Erdogan sometimes refers to Islamic values in such a way that part of the secularist sections of society are much alarmed. But in effect, if you take a look at what this party has done, take, for example, women's rights. This party has renewed the civil code in such a way to improve the rights of women.
Right.
They've done nothing to limit the rights of women. Let's take this issue of Erdogan now insisting that all mothers in Turkey have at least 3 children. Of course, some people, the secularists, of course, take this as meaning that as his intention to lock women up in the homes so that they engage themselves with nothing else than just raising children. But there's, of course, another logic behind it, and that logic is Turkish population is very rapidly showing the signs of what has been experienced in the West. The birth rate is going down, and he says that if these trends continue, Turkey will soon, in a couple of decades, will be in need of importing labor from other countries. So the population...
Gastarbeiter, as the Turkish are called in Germany. Listen, Sahin, we have to turn to the regional scene.
May I suggest that you make that question?
And then we open. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll make just one question about the situation in the region, and then we open to the people who are watching us. Of course, the major issue is Syria and its ally Iran, right? Iran is a regional rival for Turkey, as much as... I've heard, I was recently in Lebanon, and I heard that Turkey was opening its borders for the Caucasus Brigade to come from Chechnya and other parts of Russia. The Islamist fighters were coming to Syria, and that Turkey would be playing a role in that as well. There are rumors that they've created an airline from Istanbul to Aden, the Turkish Airlines, which the flight goes empty from Istanbul to Aden and comes full of Yemeni fighters. And there is this recent agreement with a Chinese company to provide missile systems to Turkey, and the United States has said that this company is in their blacklist because they have provided nuclear technology to Iran and Syria and North Korea, and so that might indicate that Turkey has some sort of a nuclear program our intentions, worried about Iran's role in the region. And so I wonder if you could organize for us these ideas and tell us what are the strategic interests of Turkey regarding the Syrian conflict and its rivalry with Iran.
This is again a very big, broad question, Lourival. I'll try to be as precise, as concise as possible. Now, this government of AKP, when it came to power in 2002, put in place a new foreign policy paradigm, which is often referred to as zero problems with neighbors policy. The crux of the paradigm was Davutoğlu, the foreign minister of Turkey, which has been the architect of this new paradigm, put forward this ideal for the Turkish foreign policy. Let us negotiate, have dialogue with all the neighbors, and not only with the neighbors, but in all directions, and try to solve our differences by negotiation and dialogue. And let's take away military threats and military use of military force as a tool in foreign policy. And instead, let's do away with visas. Let's improve political, cultural, and economic ties so that economic interdependence will enhance security for Turkey and also will help Turkey achieve a more rapid economic development. This was a very sound policy. I mean, with this policy, we had improved relations in all directions. With this policy, for example, Turkey was willing to have a solution on the Cyprus island issue. Unfortunately, it failed because there was a referendum on the United Nations plan for a unification of the island, and it was rejected by the Greek side, and unfortunately that did not work. Anyway, of course, it's a big issue, but this policy was very sound, improving relations in all directions. Of course, it didn't work so well with Armenia. There were problems that came into being with Israel, etc. But in the main, this policy made Turkey more secure. It was extremely important that this policy led to a closer relations with Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, and now Iraqi Kurdistan has become the major trade partner of Turkey, supplying Turkey's energy needs alongside Russia and Iran, of course. But then came the Arab revolutions. I'm sorry, I'm hopping over issues that are important in between, but then came the Arab revolutions. Now, the position, what would they do when people have revolted against autocracies? They gave their full support to the people in Tunisia and then in Egypt. When the Libyan case was on the agenda, first Ankara wanted to try to convince Gaddafi that he should reform, do something towards, dissolving this autocratic regime, but of course that was not possible. And in the beginning, Turkey was reluctant to be part of the NATO intervention, but later changed its mind and joined and helped the intervention in Libya. And then came the big issue of Syria, of course. Now, Syria is a very interesting case because until zero problems with neighbors policy of AKP, Syrian and Turkish relations were very much strained because Syria traditionally supported supported the PKK, the Kurdish armed rebellion against Ankara, and there were major differences over the border. Hatay is one of the provinces of Turkey is claimed by Syria, and then there are disputes over the use of the rivers that originate from Turkey and run through Syria and Iraq. Anyway, with this opening towards Syria, the relations improved in such a way that it was unimaginable that this could ever take place. So visas were lifted, and all of a sudden Aleppo became just an extension of Gaziantep, one of the industrial centers in the southeast. In all fronts there were improving relations between the two countries. But then came the people's revolt in Syria. What shall Ankara do about this? For about 7 or 8 months, I don't know, maybe even longer, Davutoğlu traveled frantically between Ankara and Damascus, trying to convince Mr. Assad that he has to open up. But instead of opening up, the regime in Damascus attacked peaceful demonstrations in an armed way, and after a while, Ankara gave up trying to convince Mr. Assad and declared the regime to be illegitimate, and then quite openly asked for regime change in Syria. But another very important consequence of the regime was that refugees, Syrian refugees, have flooded Turkey, and Turkey opened up its borders for Syrian refugees. Now the number already are around 500,000, 200,000 of them living in refugee tents being taken care of the Turkish state, and the rest, about 300,000, have spread all over the country, living with relatives, living with people that help them this way or another. I read something like 100,000 already living in Istanbul, far away from the Syrian border. So that is also a big problem. Syria used to be one of the main ways for the Turkish goods to be transported to the MENA area. So that door closed down on Turkey. And of course there were skirmishes on the border between Turkey and Syria, and then bombs blowing up within the Turkish territory by, groups who were probably trying to provoke some sort of confrontation between the two countries. Many other incidences that would have provoked a confrontation. What Turkey did was ask NATO to provide Patriot missiles, and they were put in place in case Syria would attack Turkey for this reason or another. And now I turn to your question, whether Turkey was helping the resistance movement, the opposition, and in what ways it was supporting. It provided diplomatic support for the Free Syrian Army, for the national coalition that represents the more, let's say, moderate and reasonable democratic elements of the Syrian opposition. But there have been arguments, just as you mentioned, that Turkey was also supporting some of the radical elements in the resistance or the opposition in Syria. it is possible. The government has always denied this, that they did not support in any way the radical elements, and they have recently very clearly made a point of saying that we don't support these people. They are as dangerous and as bad as what Assad is doing to its people. And but however, of course, they find themselves in a very difficult position because they have miscalculated this, the durability of the Assad regime in Syria. They thought that just like in Egypt and in Tunisia and in Libya, Assad would be toppled pretty soon, and that's of course a major blunder. It's a major blunder because the argument of Davutoğlu was that he knew so well the Middle Eastern affairs that whatever happened in the Middle East, Turkey was well aware and well knowledgeable about. But it's proved such a great big failure. And now, of course, how to get yourself out of this very difficult position when the Western powers have gone along with Russia to, in a way, move away from any idea of a regime change in Syria. How is Turkey going to adapt itself to the position adopted by its Western allies? It's a very difficult issue. And now some ideas are being flirted that they will give full support to the so-called Geneva II conference for a diplomatic solution, and they have clearly made statements regarding that they have in no way, they are in no way in favor of these radical Islamist groups who seem to be starting to prevail among the opposition. That's also another big problem for Turkey, because now if you don't agree with these, whatever these radical groups are doing, you have to take some measures to put them under control. So Syria is a great big problem, but we have another problem now. You are very well aware with, and that is the Egyptian problem. Because...
Can we leave this for the discussion with the
Okay,
audience? Because
okay.
I presume this topic will resurface.
Okay.
So before we start our Q&A session here, I have to, and I want to give credit to our sponsors. I will do that in Portuguese. Eu queria agradecer os nossos patrocinadores que têm tornado possível a programação de seminários ao longo deste ano, e em específico este seminário aqui, mencionando as empresas que nos têm apoiado: a CPFL, o Santander, a BMF Bovespa, a Telefônica, a IBM, Telefônica Vivo, Croton Votorantim, o apoio da Band News, que acho que está aqui, Fábio está aqui, e o apoio da Universia também.